So when we think about human beings created in the image of God, our attention is also brought back to the garden. It's interesting how God sets Adam and Eve within a garden. Things that are put in a garden are meant to grow. And God has created human beings for continuous growth. God's ultimate goal and desire was that the human beings that he created would live in union with him, would participate in his divine nature through the indwelling Holy Spirit, and would continue to grow. And I would propose that this growth that God intends for human beings is a process that will never end. So that even in the next life, even in the life of paradise, we continue to grow, we continue to develop as human beings. Think about the fact that God is infinite. If God is infinite, then, and we are not, then there will always be something about God left to experience or learn. There's something in philosophy called, it's a process called the dialectical process. It can be applied to relationships as well. The dialectical process. It goes something like this. Let me start with a brook. One philosopher said, you never step in the same brook twice. That's true, isn't it? You never step in the same brook twice. If you dip your foot in the running water of a stream and you come back an hour later and dip your foot in the running water of the stream, in one sense it's the same stream, but in another sense it's a different stream. The water is different. It's different water. There have been micro changes within the stream. Little grains of sand have been carried a little bit further down. There's some algae perhaps growing below the surface. It's grown a little bit more. It's always in a process of change. Well, human beings are like that as well. So you are a certain person right now, and when you encounter another human being, you are impacted by them in some way. Sometimes in a dramatic way that is observable and you can remember it, you can write it down in your journal that night. This is how I was impacted or changed by this human being. But even if it's at a very micro level, there's something that changes within us. Every encounter changes within us something, even at the very imperceptible level. So that we are now a different person. And every encounter also does something about our capacity to engage with other human beings. It can enlarge our capacity, it can diminish our capacity. If we're growing, it enlarges our capacity. So the same thing is true with God, that we encounter God, and when we encounter something in him and it impacts us and we respond to it, that then enlarges our capacity. So we're now a different person. So that when we encounter God again, we have a larger capacity for God, to encounter God. And then we do. So it changes us again. Well, as long as God is infinite, that is a process that can never stop. And God has created us for continuous growth. I don't know if some of you have ever seen the movie or read the book, Tuck Everlasting. It's about a family back in the 1700s maybe, or something like that, who they go out on a picnic. They leave one of their children at home. The mom, the dad, and the younger son go on a picnic, and they get thirsty and they drink from a stream. And as it turns out, this stream or fount or whatever it is the fountain of youth. And so those three characters in the story are kind of frozen in time. They never age from that point forward. Of course, this only dawns on them slowly as the other brother, continues to age and turns into an old man, whereas, his parents are still, in their 40s or whatever it is. And it kind of starts off that this is the most wonderful thing in the world, but as it turns out, it actually becomes quite a hellish experience. Because all of those around you are growing and developing and dying and leaving, whereas here you are kind of stuck in this moment. It's quite an interesting commentary. Sometimes we think of heaven as this kind of static state of unchanging perfection. But if you think about it, a static state of unchanging perfection would not really be a heavenly experience at all. So we are called to continuous process and continuous growth. Spiritual growth lasts forever. Now, the original creation was good and very good and capable of growth and advancement into ever-increasing awareness of God and ever-increasing transformation into God's likeness. Let's talk a minute about the idea of perfection. Deuteronomy 18:13 says, "You shall be blameless before the Lord your God." The King James Version translates the word for blameless as perfect. You shall be perfect before the Lord your God. Well, the idea of perfection in Hebrew thought had to do with completion. It's used of completed years in Genesis 47, or a building project in 1 Kings 6. So something that is complete, something that is now what it was meant to be, is said to be perfect. The same thing is true in Greek thought. Plato said, the perfection of a fish is to swim. The perfection of a bird is to fly. In other words, something is perfect when it is what it was created to be and when it's doing what it was created to do. So perfection does not exclude the idea of progress. Perfection does not exclude the idea of ongoing development. Right? You take a child to the doctor for a checkup. Take your 5-year-old child to the doctor for a checkup. And the doctor examines the child. How much does the child weigh? How tall is the child? What are the reflex responses of the child? So on and so forth. And when he's done the examination, what does the doctor say? He's perfect. Right? That doesn't mean that he's not going to continue to grow or advance or progress or change, but he's complete for a 5-year-old. For a 5-year-old, he is what he's supposed to be. He's performing at the level he's supposed to be performing. So that's why we can think in biblical terms of both perfection and progress and development. Will heaven be perfect? It will be. But that doesn't mean that it will be static or unchanging. We are called to a continuous process of growth and development until we reflect God in all of his glory. Well, again, is that a process that will ever change? Now, you might think, well, that sounds frustrating, to always be pursuing a goal but never achieving it. Well, that depends on what the goal is. You know, if your goal is to, I read somewhere the other day that there's 1,600 restaurants in Vancouver. That sounds amazing to me. So if your goal is to eat every dish on every menu in every restaurant in Vancouver, that's probably a goal that you will never achieve, because even as you're working through what's there, there's new menus being developed, there's new restaurants that are opening. So it might not be a goal that you'll ever achieve, but I don't think you'll be frustrated. I think you will enjoy the process. And in the same way as we are called to grow, to ever reflect the image and the likeness of God, that is a process that is not going to end and is not going to finish.